A middle-aged woman stood on the edge of a rice field embankment, her rough hands tightly gripping a sickle that had long been her loyal companion. Her face full of life's lines looked serious as she stared at the wild grass growing along the embankment of her rice field. The morning was still young, the dew had not completely disappeared from the leaves, but her spirit was already burning to finish today's work. With steady steps, she began to cut the grass that was spreading wildly, blocking the path she usually passed every day. Every swing of her sickle produced a distinctive sound, shrek, shrek, a sound that had been familiar to her ears since she was young. The sun began to rise slowly, its rays shining on her sweaty face, but she did not complain. For her, working in the rice fields was not only an obligation, but also a part of her simple but meaningful life. Her strong, trained hands continued to move nimbly. Every clump of fallen grass brought her own satisfaction. Every now and then she would stop, wipe her sweat with the end of her worn sleeve, then resume her work. There were no complaints, only a strong determination to keep her rice fields clean and tidy. In the distance, the sound of sparrows flying over the rice fields could be heard melodiously. As if they understood the woman's struggle, she smiled slightly, feeling proud of what she had done. This rice field was not just a field, but a legacy that had to be preserved, land that had supported her family for years. As noon approached, the rice field embankments were now free of weeds. He patted his hands, heaved a sigh of relief, then sat for a moment under a kapok tree on the edge of the rice field. From where he sat, he stared at the expanse of yellowing rice, a sign that the harvest would soon arrive. His heart felt at peace. Although today's work was tiring, he knew that all of this would bring blessings. With a faint smile, he got up and walked towards the small hut on the edge of the rice field, leaving the embankments that were now clean, ready to welcome the harvest season that would soon arrive. Every morning, when dew still clings to the tips of the rice leaves and a thin mist still covers the rice fields, the middle-aged woman is ready with a sickle in hand. This job has become part of her daily life, clearing the rice field embankments from wild grass that continues to grow if left alone. She walks along the embankment with careful steps. Her feet, which are used to stepping on wet soil, know exactly where to step so as not to slip. Her right hand grips the sickle tightly, while her left hand occasionally pulls at the weeds that have slipped between the soil on the embankment. The grass has grown abundantly after the rain fell a few days ago, making this path slippery and messy. If left alone, it will not only make it difficult for her to take steps when taking care of the rice fields, but it can also hinder the growth of the rice on the edge of the plot. Every morning, when dew still clings to the tips of the rice leaves and a thin mist still covers the rice fields, the middle-aged woman is ready with a sickle in hand. This job has become part of her daily life, clearing the rice field embankments from wild grass that continues to grow if left alone. She walks along the embankment with careful steps. Her feet, which are used to stepping on wet soil, know exactly where to step so as not to slip. Her right hand grips the sickle tightly, while her left hand occasionally pulls at the weeds that have slipped between the soil on the embankment. The grass has grown abundantly after the rain fell a few days ago, making this path slippery and messy. If left alone, it will not only make it difficult for her to take steps when taking care of the rice fields, but it can also hinder the growth of the rice on the edge of the plot. Not far from where she worked, her husband was also busy. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat to protect himself from the rising sun. In his hand, he held a sack of Ponska fertilizer ready to be spread on the rice field plots. With steps that were used to the muddy ground, he walked slowly, took a handful of fertilizer from the bucket he was carrying, then spread it with practiced movements. The fertilizer granules fell evenly to the ground. The woman glanced at her husband, watching how the man worked with great precision. She knew that spreading fertilizer was not an easy job. Fertilizer must be spread evenly so that the rice grows well and produces an abundant harvest. If there is too much in one spot, the plants can be damaged, but if there is too little, the harvest can be reduced. That is why her husband is always careful in measuring each handful of fertilizer that is spread. A gentle breeze blew, bringing the distinctive aroma of wet rice fields and fresh air. Occasionally, the sound of sparrows flying over the rice fields could be heard, looking for leftover grains that they might be able to eat. In the distance, several other farmers were also seen busy with their respective jobs. Some were pulling weeds, some were plowing the land with tractors, and some were checking the condition of their plants. The husband continued to spread fertilizer with great patience. Every step he took left a footprint in the mud of the rice fields, but he didn't care. For him, this rice field was not just a place to work, but a source of life that had supported his family for years. With a good harvest, they could send their children to school, buy daily necessities, and continue their lives better. After several plots of rice fields had been fertilized, the man stood for a moment, wiped the sweat from his forehead, then looked at the expanse of rice fields that were already filled with fertilizer grains. He felt relieved, knowing that what he had done today would bear sweet fruit when the harvest season arrived. He then walked to the edge of the rice field, approaching his wife who had also just finished her work. After a while I was here, it was time for them to take a break. They sat together under a kapok tree that grew on the edge of the rice field. The woman took out a bottle of water from her small bag and handed it to her husband. The man accepted it with a tired smile, then took a slow sip.